want to get to this Russia-Indonesia issue because there is a lot of opacity when it comes to getting some clearance and clarity on what has gone on here. We see reports out of Russia that Russia was seeking to have a military base in Indonesia just 1,300 kilometres from Darwin. The Prime Minister was asked about this morning, as was Penny Wong and the Defence Minister Richard Marles. All of them have said that they're not going to engage publicly in diplomacy, but we're trying to get to the bottom of whether this request was even actually made or whether it was misinformation out of Russia. Joining me now is the former Home Affairs Secretary, Mike Pezzullo. He's in Canberra for us today. Mike, thanks so much for your time. This is the first time this campaign that we've seen some kind of interference or national security really be firmly on the agenda and top of the agenda today. From what you have seen this morning, the comments, or more accurately, non-comments from everyone from the Prime Minister down, what has gone on here and why do they not want to comment?
Good morning, Laura. Well, the first point to make is I think the government's handled the matter very well. It's sought to quickly engage with the Indonesian government at ministerial level. You saw that in Mr Marles's statement. I think that draws a line under the immediate, if you like, firestorm. What is deeply concerning, though, and I understand why it would be the case, having been privy to these sorts of discussions, that the PM and others might be privy to particular information that either validates, corroborates, or indeed perhaps even goes further than the Jane's report, Jane's being the military intelligence journal that reported this yesterday. They won't want to comment on that either to confirm it or deny it because it starts to give away our sources and methods of collecting intelligence. What's concerning, though, here, Laura, is the pattern. The former Russian defence minister, in fact, he was the defence minister when Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine was initiated, Sergei Shoigu. He visited Jakarta in February. It was not much mentioned or noticed here in Australia, but I certainly noticed it. It was a very important visit. That came after the first ever maritime naval exercises between Russia and Indonesia last November. And we've just seen with the elevation of President Prabowo to the presidency, just a sharpening of Indonesian foreign policy where they're clearly hedging more so than under President Widodo. And that includes, of course, joining the BRICS group of nations, which is really an anti-American economic grouping that ultimately aspires, for instance, try to move off the US dollar for trading arrangements. Probably a fanciful aspiration, but it's an aspiration nonetheless. So there's a pattern of activities here. One final data point that reinforces that concern. The Indonesians have actually hosted a Tu-95 Bear bomber run in December of 2017, if memory serves. They actually allowed a training mission to fly down from the Russian Far East, as the Russians call it, to this very airfield, in Biak in Papua. They conducted a long-range reconnaissance mission just to test flying over those distances, and then they flew back to Russia.
So what is the strategic interest that Russia would have in Indonesia? What might that be if it was true? Or is it, working in collaboration as a stalking horse for China?
China would find it very hard, I think, to negotiate any kind of transit, basing, rotational practice or training flights, particularly of their strategic bombers. They've got a very powerful strategic bomber, the H-6K. I don't think that would even get off first base. We saw that training mission some years ago that I mentioned. The Indonesians at least are willing to countenance at least training missions, if not a base that they've ruled out. Why, Laura? It's because Russia owes China a lot, and in the Far East or the Pacific, the Russians call it the Far East, they would be prepared, if it came to it, and we've talked about this many times, on the low probability but hugely consequential prospect of military conflict in the Pacific, they would be there reinforcing their Chinese allies, and they would be prepared, very low probability, it's unlikely to happen, but they'd be prepared to strike at Japan, for instance, out of the Kamchatka Peninsula and other bases in the Russian Far East. And if they could get some kind of access into Papua, unlikely, but if they could get into that area, they'd be a handful for us to deal with, both in terms of their potential operations in the Bismarck Sea, up to Guam and potentially into Northern Australia.
Mike, when you saw that question put to Anthony Albanese there, and he wasn't giving much in this media conference, could this be an attempt at Russian interference into our election, albeit, not a subversive one, more a clumsy public one, but this is what we're talking about today? No,
I don't think that's the case here at all. It might be amplified. The Russians might be amplifying it just to stir things up. I think, and I've got no basis for knowing this on anything other than what I've read in the open press, I think a request was made, probably in February at the time of Shoigu's visit to Jakarta in February. And remember, he's a war criminal, given what has happened in Ukraine. It was disappointing. I think we should be disappointed by the fact that he was welcomed into Jakarta, and indeed, as I recall, I think he might have even been a guest in the presidential palace. I think a request has been made, and I think just some journalists or analysts at the Jane's Military Information newsletter have pieced it together and have probably seen things or have been told things. That then got reported yesterday. That then became the media story. I don't for a moment think that it was sort of placed by the Russians to interfere. I think it's actually a couple of analysts actually stumbling onto something that's real.
How much does it worry you that Russia even made the request or is interested in being in Indonesia?
Well, I said earlier it's part of a concerning pattern, but this is what defence planning and strategic planning is all about. You plan for reasonable worst-case scenarios, and one of the reasonable worst-case scenarios that's been a staple of Australian defence strategy ever since Kim Beazley, who's a Labor legend, a great defence minister, developed the policy in the mid-80s of being able to protect against attacks coming either, and this is a formula that was put on the public record by the Hawke government, so I'm not being shrill in saying this. Any attack on Australia is likely to come from Indonesia, unlikely, or through Indonesia, possible. And so that's why foreign basing in Indonesia is something that's of high interest to our intelligence analysts, to the government. I agree with the Prime Minister, a lot of this should be dealt with behind closed doors, but I'm here as a commentator who, speaking on the publicly available information, can speculate about what's going on. We should be concerned, but we shouldn't be surprised. As I said, they sent a bomber run down through that very same airbase 8 years ago. I think they would love to be able to have, if not a permanent base, but certainly a rotational base with maybe some bare facilities, some austere infrastructure that they could quickly get activated. I doubt very much the Indonesians would give that to them because they know that they'd face. Well, frankly, they should face a furious response from Australia because any such basing in Indonesia would be an unfriendly act to Australia because it's really only there to attack bases in northern Australia, potentially the American base that's been built at Manus in Papua New Guinea, and a backdoor attack into the large American base at Guam. It would be a hostile, and if not hostile, certainly unfriendly act.
Mike Pezzullo, thanks so much for your insights this morning. Certainly a good explanation when we weren't getting one from the politicians, unwilling. And as you point out, some things do need to be done behind closed doors. We appreciate it. We'll see you soon.